Hey guys, it's Rita here. I wanted to give you a little quick background on why I started podcasting and continue doing it to this day. So I am actually using Anchor.fm to record this podcast because it's free. One of the best parts about it is that they give you the creation tools that allow you to record and edit the podcast right from my phone or the computer. Anchor also distributes it for me, which is really cool because it makes it so much easier for me, and I can be heard anywhere from Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. You can also make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. So what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app now. Thanks for joining me for Empowerment and All That, your favorite podcast for female empowerment. I'm your host, Rita Bautista, and I make sure to deliver some motivational tips and inspirational stories from women with diverse backgrounds. Stay tuned for the next show. Hey guys, it's Rita here with Empowerment and All That. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast. I want to let you know that I'm actually using Anchor as the easiest way to make this podcast. Anchor actually gives me everything that I need all in one place for free, which I can use right from my phone or my computer. The creation tools allow for me to record and edit my podcast so it sounds fabulous. Best part about it, though, is that they distribute it for me so I can be heard anywhere from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and so many more. Want to know a secret? You can actually make money from this podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to another episode of Empowerment and All That, your favorite podcast for female empowerment. Now, I have a huge apology to give you guys. The consistency of the episodes has not been as strong, and I really apologize because I did make a promise to everyone to make sure that I was uploading an episode weekly. Well, you'll actually be excited as to why. I just recently launched a new project called Latina Podcasters, where you can follow us on Instagram, and I make sure to highlight a Latina podcaster every day. And on top of that, we have a secret or private group on Facebook that you can now follow along with us as well. So if you are starting out a podcast, considering having one, or you have one currently, or you have a favorite podcast that you'd like to get involved in being highlighted every day, please make sure to follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at Latina Podcasters. Now, for this show, you guys, I'm super, super excited to have Martiza Plascencia, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, on the show today. We're going to be diving into what seems to be an extremely important topic about toxic relationships. Now, if you've been in a toxic relationship, or you know someone who's been in a toxic relationship, or you may be questioning whether or not you're in one or could potentially be the toxic partner in the relationship, we're going to dive into some really awesome information, and Maritza is just going to tell us just exactly what to look for. So Maritza, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate having you on my show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Maritza, tell me a little bit about what made you want to get involved in helping families and people.
I didn't know that this is where I was headed. I actually thought that I wanted to be in law enforcement. Growing up, I remember being Latina, I remember going to a lot of parties as a child, and unfortunately witnessing a lot of fights between couples that always resulted, in typically the wife getting, or the girlfriend getting somehow, pushed around or beat up by the husband or the boyfriend. And I remember just constantly having that dialogue with my parents. My dad always talking about how, that wasn't right, or, that's not something you put up with. And sometimes that would result in the police being called, people being taken away, and so on. And so I remember just growing up around all of that and just thinking to myself, oh, I want to be a police officer, or I want to be somehow involved in law enforcement, and I want to be there to help the people that are getting hurt. I went on to get a degree, my bachelor's in criminology, and that led me to work with, or do an internship at juvenile hall. And I would interview the minors that were there, and a lot of the stories that I would listen to involved really sad stories of, absent parents, parents that had passed away. What I realized is that a lot of the times when people are hurting others is because there's something bigger than them that's happened that maybe involves trauma or, other circumstances that have led them to feel frustrated and misunderstood. And, and that kind of got me thinking a lot about, the adults that I witnessed hurting their partners when I was a child. And it got me really curious. And also having experienced trauma myself, growing up, not witnessing domestic violence with my parents. In fact, I grew up in a home where there were no fights. They would whisper fight. So that is another unhealthy extreme of relationships, because then you don't teach your children how to negotiate and how to, navigate relationships and disagreements in relationships. But just having gone through trauma myself in other ways, I realized when I got to college that I needed help. And so that kind of led me to seek out counseling. And so a combination of all those things got me really interested in, exploring the field of mental health. My first job fresh out of college was as a victim advocate for specifically domestic violence cases. Where I live in the county I live in California, the demand for that kind of advocacy to support the victims in the cases was very high, specifically for the Spanish speaking population. So I was one of many of the advocates serving that population in criminal court. And that made me realize how ill-equipped I was to really support people that were going through that. And that's how, again, in combination with everything that I had already experienced up until that point, I decided to then pursue a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, because I wanted to be more equipped to help people that were now dealing with mental health issues due to their traumatic experiences. And so that's kind of how I got to where I'm at.
Isn't it interesting that when you've gone through traumatic experiences or have been around not the best design of relationships, that also leads you to want to help people in the future?
Yeah, it definitely makes you, I think, more aware, because you can relate on some level, even if it's not the same exact experience as you see others going through, or the same exact kind of pain that you see them experiencing. You at least have some sense of, of the pain. You've been through something, and that you know what pain feels like, I think. And I think that's what makes us more open to being empathic towards others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I could define myself as something, is definitely an empath, but it's gotten me into a lot of trouble sometimes, because the fact that you want to relate to people so much because you have been through this pain sometimes puts you in they almost feel as though you're encroaching, because you're like, I want to protect you. Like, you're almost like, I want to protect you from this. But let me ask you a question. So what would you say, how are relationships defined, and what would be a good relationship?
How are relationships defined? So relationships, that's a very vague question. So I'm going to do my best at answering that one.
Okay.
So relationships are defined, I think, if we're talking about intimate partner relationships, they're defined by two people having an agreement, whether official or unofficial, that they are relating to each other in ways that they don't relate with others. So whether they're being intimate or whether they're being exclusive, there's different, I would say, variants of that. But I think that's what defines a relationship, is the intimacy level that you involve yourself with in the relationship with another person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's more or less just of clarity. So I guess for this particular topic, we'll specifically target partnership relationships. But I mean, I think when you're talking about toxic relationships as a whole, that those boundaries can really be defined in, you know, parental relationships, in friendships, in family relationships. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I like to always tell people, even if the focus tends to be intimate partnerships, I always tell people that even those relationships that fall outside of intimate partner relationships are still relationships we have to be really aware of, because those are the relationships where we get to practice our relationship skills, where we get to learn our relationship skills that we then bring into an intimate relationship as a partner.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important that we keep all of that, even though we get to separate it. It's very important that we keep that in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would you say is a toxic relationship?
All right. So this is one of my favorite topics.
Awesome. I'm so excited. I mean, I'm not excited because it's such a terrible, you know, it's such a terrible
Yes.
situation for people to go through, but it's such an important conversation to have.
Yes.
Especially as women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here's the thing. This is why it's one of my favorite topics, since I don't want that to come across as anything like, oh, I love toxic relationships.
Right.
But it's more so, what makes it my favorite topic is because oftentimes when I find myself talking with people, even with people that maybe consider themselves already having a good sense of what toxic relationships are, and also a good sense of what healthy relationships are, oftentimes I find that people are surprised to learn new things. And I think it's a topic that has a lot to give. And I think it's one that we should never think that we know enough about. Because relationships are evolving all the time. You know, our relationships are not the same they're not the same now that they were 20 years ago, 10 years ago. You know, because our relationships are impacted by our environment. And so it's something that we have to constantly keep updating on, you know, updating ourselves on in regards to what healthy and what unhealthy or toxic looks like in our relationships, especially when we consider stuff like technology and how that factors into our relationships, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's one of my favorite topics, because there's always something new that comes up that people, you know, have a response to, and they're like, oh my goodness, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this day and age, then, what would you say would be the most current definition of what a toxic relationship is?
So I'll give you the eternal definition, and then I'll add in the current definition, or the modern definition. So the overall definition of a toxic relationship is one where people are not able to be themselves within the relationship with the other person or the other people involved. So there is no freedom to be, there is no freedom to exist, there is no freedom to express. And when I say freedom, I'm also referring to safety. And I'm not just saying you're at risk of getting hurt physically, but also it can mean just that you're at risk of being put down, you're at risk of being told that what you think, what you feel, what you say is not valid. So that's basically a way that you are being told that it's not okay to be you within that context of that relationship. So I think that's the eternal definition of a toxic relationship, is one where you cannot just be. And the modern addition to that, I would say is one where technology, if we're gonna think about technology, it's one where technology is being used in the relationship in any way to impact, to manipulate, or to influence the relationship, or even to influence you and the way that you think, or the way that you respond, or the way that you are within the relationship.
Now, expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by technology is being used? Are you saying like technology is being used to control the direction of the relationship, or how things are being done? Or like, is this like posting a picture on Facebook and then being talked down to? Or is this like, manipulating of text messages? Like what does that mean exactly?
It can be everything you just said. So it can be using text messages to, threaten you when you're not picking up your phone. Or it can be using text messages to do group texts, if it's in the context of family. It can be, sending out a group text where they're, calling you out on something and having other people witness the conversation. And so that's a form of intimidation. It can be using social media to expose you somehow about something you did, or, through a picture, or through what they're saying about you. It can also be using, I used to work at a domestic violence agency, and oftentimes one of the concerns that people would come in with was, my partner somehow knows where I'm at all the time. And I have no clue how that is, how that's possible, because I turned off my GPS on my phone, and it would turn out the person had a tracker in their car that they weren't aware of.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Sometimes people thought that because their GPS was turned off, that they couldn't get tracked, but there's other technology that, software that can be downloaded onto your phone without having access to your phone. That anybody with your phone number can actually go and install on your phone with just, $20 in their pocket. So it's that simple to do. And sometimes people would say, somehow my partner knew about these text messages that I sent with, these text message exchanges I was having with my sister about, how I'm feeling about the relationship. And I was just really looking for advice, because I'm not feeling, like my partner gets me, or I'm not feeling okay about my partner's decisions. And so the partner would be aware of the text message exchange because they were monitoring the phone. So those are examples how technology can be used. Obviously, there's other ways, breaking into your email, there's software that people can install at home on their computers to be able to keep track of passwords, that sort of thing, or even just keeping track of, even the phone bill, cell phone bill. If you have a family plan, your partner can go, or your parent, if we're talking about adult children, the parent can go and be snooping on your call log and see who you're talking with and how long you're talking with them, how much time you're spending on the phone. So all of those are examples of how technology can be used to influence relationships and to make them toxic.
So it sounds like a lot of this is basically a person who feels as though they're being intimidated, or like you said, are kind of just feeling as though from what it sounds like, it's like you're almost voiceless
Yeah. And in so many ways, you have to watch what you say. You have to filter what you really want to say. Maybe you're afraid that even if you're not around the person or the people that you're saying it, that you're saying this about, and that you feel are toxic to you, you're afraid that they're somehow going to find out. And so that's something that, it definitely is somebody who feels voiceless.
So All right. So most relationships don't necessarily start off this way, right? Because if you're starting off in a really bad foot, you're not, there's probably a lot deeper rooted issues at that point. And you should probably avoid dating altogether. But like you start off in the romance phase, everything is going well. How do you in turn then find out that you're attracted to or that this situation is starting to turn toxic? Like what are some of the red flags that people can look out for when they're in this situation?
Some of the red flags are when your partner starts making you feel guilty for everything that you want to do, for example. So using emotional manipulation, let's say you want to go do something that, he or she doesn't necessarily like doing. But the last 10 times you've gone to do something together as a couple, it's always been what your partner wants. And somehow you find yourself always starting at, okay, but this time let's do something I like. And then, somehow you find yourself being guilted into going back to, all right, let's just do something you want because, it's too much trouble, having to sit here and try and convince you that it's my turn to do something that I like, So that can be a red flag, when somebody just doesn't seem to really care much about including you in the things that you do together. What else? If your partner is using intimidation, if your partner is starting, and it can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be like, the examples I just gave. It can be very subtle. It can be gestures. It can be, acting upset over something and, throwing things that, and telling you, look, I just got angry and I just needed to let it out somehow. I didn't throw it at you. That in itself can be a big red flag that your partner maybe is not necessarily a healthy person. One of the things that, intimidation can, or one of the examples for intimidation, it can also be like making certain comments. I remember sometime during, when I was learning a lot about domestic violence, I remember learning about people that would experience their partner coming and telling them stories or making comments about how they felt towards others. And in those comments or those stories that they would tell, they would insinuate that they were capable of hurting people. So that in itself is a form of subtle intimidation. I'm not telling you directly that I'm going to hurt you. I'm not telling you directly that I'm, thinking in doing something like this to you. I'm just sharing with you the way that I feel about others or towards others. And it becomes a pattern of your partner talking about that. And they're always the ones that are wronged in the situation, in examples that involve other people. So there's never, I made a mistake and I'm owning up to it. And yes, I got upset, but, I'm not feeling upset to the extent of wanting to hurt someone. It's usually I was wronged and I feel angry, therefore I'm justified. And I feel like I would want to like smash that person's head on the ground, So, but it has nothing to do with you. I'm just letting you know because you're my partner. So that's a form of intimidation. Another red flag could be your partner not wanting to include you in things that they're doing. So not wanting you to be around their friends, their family, with no reasonable explanation other than, maybe them just not wanting you to be there. If it's a little more clear that this is something that's being used as a way to control you, it can be, their explanation can be, well, I don't like you being around so-and-so because I don't like that person seeing you because, I think they have a thing for you, or, it can be more explicit. So it can vary. I think in our culture, and I'm talking about the Latinx community,
Mm-hmm.
I think in our culture, using male privilege is very prominent.
Yeah.
The whole, men go with the men, women go with the women. Sometimes that in itself can be a red flag. If your partner is not okay with including you because they've got to go with just the guys, and if there's no two-way street. So, it's normal for male partners to want to hang out with their male friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's normal for female partners to want to hang out with their female friends. But if you're in a relationship where, let's say, you're the male or your partner is the male that wants to do that but doesn't want you to do that, and obviously I'm talking about heterosexual relationships, but this can also happen in same-sex relationships, so that's another sign, that's another red flag of power and control being used in the relationship dynamic. And you may want to look into that. And I always tell people, I used to run a group where it was a 10-week course that people that were seeking restraining orders against their partners would be referred to. And I used to always tell people, just because a partner has red flags doesn't necessarily mean that you have to run away the moment that you identify a red flag. Red flags are red flags for a reason. They're red flags for you to check them out. You want to talk to your partner about the red flags that you're noticing. You want to find out, because your partner might not necessarily be aware that these red flags are popping up. And I always tell people, we all have red flags. Right. So in doing that, you're opening the door to also get feedback and see how red flags might be showing up for you as well. And that way you're learning and you're growing within a relationship rather than just running away from that relationship and then running into the next one and then the next one and then the next one, because there are people that get caught up in that pattern. They're too afraid once they see a red flag, and then, they end up going from relationship to relationship.
Ooh, I feel like you're talking directly to me. I'm like, oh, okay, I needed to hear all this stuff. But, I think what's interesting, there shouldn't have to be, but is there a type of person that falls or becomes attracted to these types of relationships? Because it seems sometimes, at least from the outside, there's always an aggressor and then somebody who kind of just lets that happen, at least in the relationships, or they express themselves and their feelings aren't being heard and they still go along. Like, so what in particular would you say would, like, the dynamics of that kind of?
So typically, if I want to keep it a short answer, I would say yes, there is a type of person that falls into that kind of relationship. And usually it's somebody who needs healing. But if I want to be more elaborate in my response, because that's a very general, answer, and we all need healing at any given time. Just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean I'm healed. I have my own therapist, and it's ongoing. I think I'll be in therapy for the rest of my life. So I think that typically we tend to fall or gravitate towards those relationships when, let's say, for example, that is something that we grew up around. Let's say that there was domestic violence in the home that we grew up in. I gave you the example about how my parents used to whisper fight, right? I never really saw violence in my home. And I always use that as an example when I'm teaching others, is that you don't necessarily have to come from a home where there was violence in order for you to fall into a toxic relationship or an unhealthy relationship. You can also come into a relationship with very little knowledge about what a healthy relationship should look like, because nobody really taught you. So if that's you, if you have no clue as to, if you ask yourself the question of what does a healthy relationship look like? And you really don't have a clue other than just very basic, well, there's no hitting, because that typically is the question, the answer I would get when I would ask someone that was taking my classes. That's not all. There's way more to that. And so if that's your answer, then there is an indication that you've got a lot of growth to do. You've got a lot of education to acquire in terms of relationships. So if you're not at a place where you can give a more elaborate answer to that question, then you're at risk of falling into an unhealthy relationship, because you don't have a full picture of what a healthy relationship should look like. So you're very much at risk of falling into a toxic one. I think also, coming from the Latinx, background, we come from a collectivist culture, and most of us do. And whether you were born, whether you're an immigrant that was born abroad, or whether you're you're the child of immigrants. And that even goes for people that are, that come from an immigrant background, but that are here, second, third, fourth generation, because the dynamic gets passed on. The relationship dynamic gets passed on because we repeat patterns. And so coming from a collectivist culture or a collectivist background, we tend to want to, you were saying this earlier, we want to rescue others, right? And sometimes we don't realize that in wanting to rescue others, there is an element of wanting to exert power and control over them. So sometimes we can build a toxic relationship without realizing or without intending to do so. And thinking, we may have the best intentions in the world. We may think that, our partner doesn't know all that we know, and we want to protect them. And so because we know best, or because we've had other experiences that maybe our partner doesn't have, we may put ourselves in the role of being the protector, and that can make for the relationship to turn toxic, because all of a sudden we find ourselves wanting to exert our control over this person, or vice versa. Our partner may find themselves being, the rescuer for us. And so, that kind of goes back to the whole idea of, needing healing. If I am the partner who is looking for a protector, is looking for somebody to rescue me, then that means that I need some healing to work on, because we really should never be in a position where we feel that we need others to take care of us to the extent where they're going to make life decisions for us on a daily basis.
So you're saying there is, I guess, at the end of the day, it seems like there could be a possibility of changing the dynamic of these relationships, right?
Definitely. I always say this. I always say that, we're not born being, I don't believe that we're bad people. I don't believe there's anybody that's a bad person. I believe that we are people that have life experiences that lead us to have certain ideas and create certain narratives, certain stories about what life is like and about what relationships should be like. And those lead us to make bad decisions. So if we go back to the root cause of why you think, relationships should look this way, or why you think, if let's say you're the aggressor, why you think that it's okay to hit your partner, or to control your partner, or to tell your partner they can't wear a certain thing or go a certain place, there's usually a root cause. If we can get to that root cause, then typically you're able to understand where that comes from, and you're able to own it and see that, oh, this is really my own injury from a traumatic experience that I had. And it does take a lot of work. It's not going to be go to 5 therapy sessions and bam, you're cured. No, it's a journey.
Yeah. I'm a proponent for therapy. I think I've been in therapy for the last I was in therapy for about 3 years and then moved, kind of stopped. And then I realized I needed maintenance.
Yes. Yes.
But I agree with you 100%. I mean, with me, and I've talked about this pretty freely in previous episodes, like, and my parents were divorced at a very young age. My mother had to be a single parent, but she was also, as you said, like, I mean, the Latina or Latinx community, when those roles switch and a woman is the head of the household, she's extremely dominant. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't always work when you're trying to build a relationship. And so it's like, not necessarily learning the healthy boundaries of what relationships look like, or trying to figure out exactly how relationships look, I think is a huge thing. And one of those things that I've personally been trying to heal from, and I have fallen, I wouldn't even call it necessarily victim of toxic relationships, because luckily I was able to get out of them. Mm-hmm. But never, as you mentioned, looking for those red flags and pivoting. I basically would, as soon as I saw the red flags or whatever, I'd run away from that situation, because I felt as though there were, versus, as you mentioned, working through that.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the common misconception that people get to from toxic relationships. Is there a way to fix that? With your partner? Obviously, I'm not saying, if it's a toxic relationship where somebody's being abused physically, doesn't sound like it would be something to stay in, but, other relationships in which people can figure out boundaries, and just learn to heal. I mean, seems like a smart way to go about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that one of the problems that we have this day and age is that, and this is again, how times have changed, right? We are so fed up with, this male dominant culture, right? Mm-hmm. That we have a lot of women rising up and saying, basta, no more, we're done, right? Mm. And so what that's created, and I see this a lot in the work that I do, a lot of women with the idea that they're wanting to prevent themselves from being taken advantage of or being hurt in the ways that they've seen other women in their lives be hurt, they end up becoming really strong women, but also using the strength in misinformed ways. And that gets in the way of healthy relationships, because then you either find a partner that's going to try to match that strength and you're going to be butting heads. And that's really dangerous, because that can end up escalating into an abusive relationship where, you're hurting each other, or you're going to end up finding yourself, running away or being run away from, because that's getting in the way. And so it's almost like the times have created this sense of there's no more room for soft, energy. There's no more room for feminine energy. There's no more room for, us being women. It's almost like we have to be men in relationships in order to not be hurt. And I think that that's something that, we have to be including more in the conversation when we talk about relationships, that it's okay for us to be women. It's okay for us to bring in our feminine energy, because ultimately, we have very different functions in relationships than men do, and I'm talking about, I can tell you, I give the example of, I've taught my husband how to be a more nurturing person, just like he's taught me how to be more, less emotional around certain situations. He models for me.
Yeah.
And so, it's one of those things where we have to balance each other out. But if we don't have that concept, if we're not aware of that concept, and if we're not aware that it's something that we can kind of, balance and play with, and then we go through life thinking, well, I just have to be strong, because of what I know or what I've seen that's happened to others. And so that in itself can create for, the breeding ground for toxic relationships.
I'm so glad you touched upon that subject because, I've been saying this jokingly, and I'm like, 2019 is the year of the divine feminine, and, women are on the rise. And I agree with you wholeheartedly with the fact that, we are in this place where women are being noticed and they are kind of tired of the masculine energy overpowering their own. But I do agree with you as well. And it's kind of scary to almost like say this openly, that we do need that feminine energy as well. You don't need to, bash open walls to prove your point. We have a completely different, distinct way of being able to be heard. And it doesn't necessarily mean that has to carry into our relationships. And that was a very hard lesson for me to learn because, as I mentioned before, I was raised being that woman. So I feel like the world is finally catching up to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is going on? Like now everybody's like, so, she power. And I'm like, where have you guys been? I've been here my whole life. It's not as cool as you think it is. Like, trust me, you want to keep, as a person, as an adult now, I've learned, obviously to be a little bit more, to be more reserved about making sure to, kind of embrace feminine energy and not one of the things that do is like hide that, be super strong, hide your emotions. It's like wants that need to be hidden, but you feel like it's, I like I said, I mentioned earlier, I really, what you just said about, that female energy and remembering to keep that.
Yeah. It's really important that we start bringing more awareness to that, because the world is the way that it is. I mean, let's talk about toxic relationships on a global scale, right? Mm-hmm. All you have to do is you have to turn on your TV, watch the news. You have to, go on your phone and look at the news, the news headlines, whether it's here or anywhere else, mass shootings everywhere. And it's because people are so disconnected from, from themselves, and I think that's part of what feminine energy brings in, to relationships. Mm-hmm. If we are softer, if we are able to be more emotional, we're able to then teach others how to connect with themselves. Because I really, truly think that we are the ones that connect humanity. I mean, come on, we're the ones who birth other human beings, So,
yeah.
and so that is something that I think if we become more conscious about it, we can start shifting the energy on a global scale, because it's not an accident why we have so much toxicity in relationships, whether, on a small scale, in our communities, and you can pick any population. You can pick, Latinos, you can pick, African American community, you can pick, Caucasians. It doesn't matter. You're going to find it anywhere. You can pick anywhere, from any socioeconomic status, profession. I've worked with, people from all walks of life. I've worked with doctors, dentists, other therapists. I mean, I've worked with any form of professional and anybody that doesn't have a profession or a formal education that has experienced a very similar type of toxic relationship. So it doesn't discriminate. It's something that, clearly doesn't care about borders, doesn't care about titles, doesn't care about labels. And so that tells you this is a bigger issue. It's about the culture that we have as on a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like
so
I took it somewhere else.
No, look, I mean, I think you're 100% on it though. I mean, there are so many world, and like something as simple as, if a man is a little bit softer and he's teased about not having a masculine, not having that masculine energy, and then it turns into something completely different. It's like, even those kind of relationships can be very toxic, right? So like, being told as a young man, you're not allowed to express your feelings, or you're not allowed to show emotion.
Yeah.
And that begins to create somebody harboring resentment towards someone who told them they couldn't be who they were exactly, or who they felt like on the inside. I mean, I think you're absolutely onto something. I mean, toxic relationships, although we're talking about these in more of like the partnership perspective on the global scale, you can directly see the correlation between, having these kind of relationships on the family level, and then how that turns into a larger scale of things. Because I don't know, I think when you accept these things in a community and it continues to happen until somebody says no, like you said, no más, I'm done, aquí no más quedo.
Yeah.
I think that's when you start to see significant changes. And like, I don't know, I think I love being Latina. I do. I love being, Latinx community is one of my favorite things, because it's a great for me. But there are a lot of things in our community that do scare me sometimes, and distance from those things that we had accepted in the past as cultural norms in our families' countries that we don't accept here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so for me, that's like, man, you kind of almost fear that being something that someone has brought with them, or something that they saw growing up and they thought was normal,
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's time to heal everybody.
Yes, definitely.
Oh man. Ask you really quick. Well, obviously I wanted to thank you for sure for coming onto the show again and just sharing such amazing information with everybody. And I hope that people walk away with some good things, good ways to kind of like take a look at the relationships that they're in, and just kind of identify, some of the things that they may be seeing, and ways to navigate red flags if they do see them. And, if they are in toxic relationships, what would you say if someone does find themselves in a toxic relationship would be the best form of help for them?
I would say reach out for help. I think that, and you may not be ready. If you're in a toxic relationship, you may not be ready. It may be too scary to reach out to a therapist. And that's why there's other ways of reaching out. Here in the US, we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And, you may not be able, or you may not be ready to talk to someone on the phone, but you're able to text with them. You're able to go on the website and just read. They have tons of information just available, waiting for anybody to just go to the website and just look at it, just read it. The website for that is thehotline.org. And they have the nice thing about this website is that they have it in other languages. They have the information available in other languages. I feel like I didn't really cover all the possible things that I could cover as red flags. And, because like I said, it's a topic that gives you so much to talk about. And so, I feel like if for whatever reason, if there's anything that I've said today, in this conversation, that anybody is feeling like, that kind of sounds like something that I'm dealing with, reach out and just reach out. Start by reading stuff. Go on the internet, go on your phone, and reach out and start reading, educating yourself, looking up red flags. And if you're not sure because, the examples are too vague and they don't necessarily address the questions that you have about your specific experience, then that's when you know that you're ready to talk to someone. You can talk to someone and you can connect, if you're ready to do so with a therapist. A lot of people don't know that there are domestic violence agencies. I used to work at a domestic violence agency where all of the services were made available free of charge to anybody who would walk through the door. So, the people that would come through, and it was both men and women, people would come through and they would be signed up for, an intake session with a clinician. And from there, it would be determined whether or not they were ready to, say, for example, join a group, or for them to receive one-on-one services. And, based on their individual needs, and together they would make the decision with the clinician about what they were ready for. Sometimes people would just come in just to know what they had available to them. They would disappear and then they would come back when they were finally ready. So I want people to know that no matter where you're at, there are services available to you. And that it's really important that you don't feel like you're alone. So that's my advice. That's my tip. If you're in a toxic relationship, reach out. Now, if you're in a toxic relationship and you and your partner both know it, then together do something about it. Don't wait until it escalates to a point of no return. A lot of one of the things that people often don't know is that if they seek out couples counseling right after a violent episode, where let's say they got into an altercation and they ended up hurting each other, whether or not the police was called, if you call me as a therapist, I'm going to say, I absolutely cannot see you as a couple. Why? Because I'm considering that it's not safe. If you guys already went to that extent, I cannot help you right now. You need individual help. So that's why I'm saying, if you as a couple recognize that it's toxic, seek help together before it escalates.
That is such great advice. I mean, I think people don't know that either, right? They think that if something's already exploded to that point, that they can still go to therapy. But I'm glad that you clarified that. If somebody out there is listening or has heard of someone who's been in a situation like that, please make sure to give them this information. And, sometimes they don't know that they're in a toxic relationship. And as friends, I mean, I've never been one to bite my tongue, but I know sometimes we try our best to, just because we don't want to intervene in other people's relationships. But when they start to get this bad, it's good to be able to share this information with them so that they know what they're looking for.
Yeah. And I want to clarify something. It's not that just because there's been an episode of where that escalated to violence, that you're absolutely disqualified from receiving couples counseling. Under certain circumstances, couples can still receive services, but most therapists won't meet with a couple if it's been a recent incident that's happened. So in my case, I screen couples when they say that they've had an episode. I screen them. I want to know very specific details before I agree to work with them. And usually my rule is it has to have been anywhere between 6 months to a year, preferably, and in most cases, a year since the last incident where there was violence. And there's a lot of other factors that go into play before deciding to take on a couple, but it is definitely something that we take very seriously, and that, it's part of our ethics as clinicians that we have to take into account everybody's safety. And so for that reason, it can be very difficult to obtain couples counseling once that line has been crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So to end on a lighter note, toxic relationships, and this can be a very heavy topic for people, but I want you guys to know that Maritza is also a normal person. She's a clinician and she is a licensed therapist, but she's also a woman who's out here doing great work and making sure that she's helping the people that come to her. So, Maritza, quick question for you before we end the show.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody knocked on your door and told you that you have $10 million in your bank account, what would you do?
I would. Oh my goodness, I would do so many things. But one of the things that I would definitely do, I would create a center where there would be free services for everybody and anybody willing to come. So, but that center would be designed in a way that those 10, did you say million?
Yeah.
$10 million would just be the beginning investment that would continue generating somehow through other services, continue generating money so that it would be a self-sustained, center to help people that are wanting therapy and that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford therapy. Because I really do believe that therapy is one of the ways that we can heal. And, it's one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves and reconnecting with ourselves and making a positive impact in the world.
That is very noble of you. That's awesome.
I would still buy myself a really big house though.
Oh, okay. That is awesome. All 10 million straight to that. But everybody has you're like big house and
yes,
a center.
I forgot to say that.
But I think what message really is that you get to find the root of whether or not a person is extremely passionate about what they're doing with their lives. And I think you hit the nail on it. I would continue doing what I'm doing now. And, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Because some people spend their entire lives trying to figure out exactly what they're passionate about, and sounds like you're already there.
Yeah. I don't think anything that happens to us is an accident. And like I told you in the beginning, just look at how I got here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I believe that we all, I believe it's part of our spiritual journey. And, that's one of the reasons why I believe therapy is very powerful, because I believe therapy is for many people, part of their spiritual journey and reconnecting with themselves on a spiritual level. So, and I see it every day in my office.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like mentioned earlier, that's like therapy is definitely one of my things that I'm going to keep with me for the rest of my life as well. And I truly believe everything you said. It's definitely part of a spiritual journey and something that I wouldn't say I depend on, because that would obviously be unhealthy.
Yeah.
But something, it makes my days better and it helps me remember who I am, and it helps me reconnect to the person that I've worked so hard to become now too, even after, working through healing.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you being so open and genuinely honest with us about such a tough topic, but at the same time, I think we were able to help out anybody who's listening right now who may be considering getting some help. And, if they are struggling through something that may be turning toxic, they're able to see the signs and, try to pivot in another direction.
Yes.
So if to get a hold of you,
they can find me through Facebook, Instagram, or look up my website. Facebook, my handle is at Mindful Quest Relationship Counseling. Instagram, it's at Mindful Quest RC, which stands for Relationship Counseling. And my website is mindfulquestrelationshipcounseling.com.
Awesome. Well, I'm also going to go ahead and put that in the show notes, guys, in case you guys would want to find Maritza a little bit easier. And if you're on Instagram, make sure to follow Empowerment and All That, and you'll be able to find all of her information there as well for the episode announcements. All right, Maritza, well, thank you so very much for joining us today. And everyone out there, remember to keep it positive or don't keep it at all.
Hey guys, it's Rita here with Empowerment and All That, thanking you for tuning in to another episode of your favorite podcast for female empowerment. Make sure to rate and subscribe this podcast to make it accessible to everyone else. And remember, keep it positive or don't keep it at all. Till the next time.